I'm Deborah Lipstadt, professor of history of the Holocaust at Emory University. And I hope you've enjoyed watching this new film by Karl Ludwig Reitinger, The Red Orchestra. I found it a fascinating film, not just because it introduced me to, I knew about the Red Orchestra, but not in the detail I know now, having watched the film more than once. But also another subject, which I think will come up in my conversation with Karl, the director, about how we look at history. So without further ado and further delay, I want to welcome Karl, speaking to us from Cologne, in Germany. And thank you for participating. And more importantly, thank you for making this film. And maybe I'll open with an introductory question. What intrigued you about this story?
Yeah, first and most important, it's a story which is not very well known in Germany and even in Belgium, in Israel, in Paris, where part of the story takes place. Second, the Red Orchestra as a rather important resistance, a net of different resistance groups has been mistreated after the war, during the Cold War. In West Germany or in Western Europe, they have been seen as traitors because some of them gave informations to the Russian Secret Service and to the Russian military. But from my point of view, this was a legitimate way of resistance. And they never got the kind of recognition they should have, from my point of view. And that's the reason why I started to think about a film. But this actually already started in the late 80s. And then I didn't know how to make it because I only had some talking heads. And it took quite a while, by coincidence, that I found out there are two really large fiction productions, which, funny enough, were shot in the same summer in 1970 on the height of the Cold War. And both have a certain element of propaganda in it. And this was the idea was to have these two fiction films and use excerpts on one hand to tell the story of the Red Orchestra, but on a meta level to reflect on the construction, how history is told, because these two films are quite different.
You know, watching the movie, the teacher in me, the professor in me, the instructor in me said, oh, this would be fascinating. Have the students watch both productions and then talk about how the different presentations, and then watch your film to see. It's almost history as a weapon, the interpretation of history. You can have your own, you can't have your own facts, but how you interpret it is quite different. And I think you make a very important point. For many people seeing this film today, watching the, whether it's the excerpts or the recreation of these spies or very, one could call them a spy, or one could call them loyal supporters of the effort to defeat the Nazis, saying we're going to do this for the Soviets, we're going to do this for the Red Army. One can bristle because one can think, oh, the Soviets, they were bad, etc. But when they're doing this, the Soviets are standing alone for all intents and purposes against the Nazis. I mean, England is in the war, but hardly so. And we in the West often think of D-Day as the great beginning of the victory, you know, but the truth is, if the Soviets hadn't, with all the mistakes they made and all the ways Stalin more than bungled, but really almost obstructed the victory, the story might have ended quite differently.
I mean, let me say one thing. The Russians sacrificed 15 million soldiers to defeat the German army. I think the Allied toll was 1 million. The German death on the field have been 6 million. So the sacrifice of the Russians were enormous. We really have to think about this. But anyway, this is one of the big or sad elements or the drama of the Red Orchestra. They found themselves between a rock and a hard place. You see, they tried to get in contact with Great Britain. They tried to get in contact with the State Department, but they were rejected. So the only possibility was left to cooperate with the Red Army.
And then even when they cooperated with the Red Army, they sent the Soviets news of the impending attack. The June was a 22nd attack by the Soviets' so-called allies, the Germans, with whom they had a pact. And Stalin not only rejected it, but cursed the person who sent it. Some of those 15 million deaths might have been saved had he paid attention. And then when they get the information that the Germans are headed to the Caucasus, to the oil supply and the armaments, he rejects that too. I mean, it's a tragedy within a tragedy within a tragedy.
Yes, that's true. They risked their lives, and actually many of them lost their lives to get these informations. Yeah. So you see, at the beginning, I thought it will be a great film. It's not about victims again on the Jewish side. It's about resistance. And I have two heroes. I have Trepper, I have Schulze-Boysen. It will be a great story. And the deeper you get, you find out it's not like this. It's not heroes. Of course, they are heroes in a way, but it's much more ambivalent. There are tragic elements in it. And that's, on one hand, that's interesting. On the other hand, it's tough. But I think for me, then it's also important to have this view on history and not to have the same kind of cliche you have in the typical history feature films. Yeah,
right. But there's another element. There's another element that you bring out towards the very end of the film, how former Third Reich Wehrmacht, German Nazi, during the Nazi era, the German army officers, Gestapo officers, SS men, used the story of the Red Army to rehabilitate themselves.
Yes.
You want to talk a little bit about that? This is historical revisionism of the First Order.
And I think you see, in Germany, this is also new. Actually, I'm proud because it was Joschka Fischer, the foreign minister of the Green Party in the 90s, who started to say we need for all institution, ministries and secret services, how was the influence of the former SS officers, of the former Gestapo officers in these institutions after the war. And this influence was enormous. Yeah. And first thing, it's the survivors who tell the story and who make history. So most of the Red Orchestra were dead, and the Gestapo people who were hunting them, they used the legacy of the Red Orchestra, and they said they are still active after the war. Now they want to subvert the Western democracy, and they used it to fund the German Secret Service together with Adenauer. And they were mainly Wehrmacht officers, mainly Gestapo, SS, so on. That's true. Yeah.
They used it not only to fund the German Secret Service, but to whitewash their own record.
Of course, yes. And
to say we were heroes. We were heroes. Yeah. We were going after these spies for the Soviets.
We are the experts to fight against Bolshevism. That was and the American and English Secret Service. They took them. They partly gave them a new identity and paid them a lot of money for this expertise.
Well, our America's whole space program was built on, not whole space, but a good part of it, Werner von Braun. Yeah. We want to get to those people. What is also unknown, but is implicit in your story, is as the war is ending, The Allies are racing, the British, the Americans are racing from the West and the Soviets from the East, not just to defeat the Third Reich, but to collect as many of the scientists and experts as they can, so that the other side won't get them and they can use them. So it's wrapped up in today's story. I'm also watching it. I was reminded of the fact that Adenauer, the Prime Minister of West Germany, of the Federal Republic, his chief of staff was Hans Globke,
Yes.
who was a minister in the or was an official in the Justice Department, the Ministry of Justice under the Nazis, and he wasn't alone. It was riddled with former Nazis. It's a fascinating story. What surprised you most as you did your research? What surprised you most in making this film?
First, I didn't know that most of the people in the Russian Secret Service were Jewish. This was surprising for me. And it's easy to understand. These were the people who were able to speak foreign languages. They knew how to behave, you know. They had relatives in other countries. So they were very good to do these jobs. And of course, many of them came from very poor families, and they were believing in the world revolution in the early 20s. And so they worked for the Secret Service. And after the war, most of them were killed or went into the Gulag, or both. Yeah. So this was interesting. Second, for me, was interesting, which I could not talk too much about in this film because there are so many aspects. I went to Israel. I have some strong contacts there since many years, and did some research. And there was always a left part of the people who went in the 20s to found the kibbutz. Haaretz is the name of this youth organization. And one part of them, from the very beginning, wanted to collaborate with the Arabs. They said, okay, we don't have a problem with them. The problem is the people, the feudalist people of the Arabs and of the Jewish and of the British who are here. So we can work together. And the more conservative Zionists, the mainstream Zionists around Begin, for instance, yeah, they denunciated them, went to the British and said, you have to kick them out. And this was how all these people had to go out. And many of them ended up or some of them ended up in the Red Orchestra in Brussels and Paris.
Mm-hmm. No, there was a great division. There was also a division among the socialists, Ben Gurion, Golda Meir, yes, Sharet, all the others who become who formed the Israeli government and Israeli society till the late 70s, when the Menachem Begin wins, who also wondered about this group. You know, I'm working a little bit now on the topic of Golda Meir, who comes to the Soviet Union, comes to Moscow in 1949 as minister plenipotentiary, essentially Israel's ambassador to the Soviet Union, and who discovers there that despite the Soviet Union's support of Israel in the UN, the hostility towards Jews, the anti-Semitism, and Stalin's irrational hatred and distrust of Jews and of so many others, which of course is the same time when many of the people of the Red Orchestra are being put in Lubyanka prison, being sent to the Gulag. So it all comes together. Well, I want to congratulate you on uncovering a too little known portion of history. My guess is that it will start a very interesting conversation. It probably will spawn other research. And what more can a historian, whether they're working as a film director or as a professor or as a writer, whatever it might be, want than knowing that their work left others with questions and wanting to dig further. So I thank you and I congratulate you on a job well done.
Many thanks for your interest and for the invitation to the festival in Atlanta. I'm proud on it.
You should be. You should be. Be well.
Thanks. Take care.